We are now going to continue Chapter 5 on content development with podcast number 2. This slide about inappropriate practices in content development is very important because we see this often in physical education. That teachers do not wait until skills are proficient before going on to a full competition. Many times teachers don't wait because they feel pressure from students when they say, "When are we going to play a game?" Well, the problem with that is if they don't have the skills and they're not proficient enough in the skills, it's going to be hard to play a game and keep the ball going for a full game. Another bad practice is students learning beginning skills and then the teacher putting them in a full game situation without having anything in between. No small-sided games, no lead-up activities that combine skills together to make a game-like practice situation. That's what makes content development successful. Dr. Rink in her textbook talks a lot about developmental analysis of content, or a chart for developmental analysis. For us, we have these different categories on the lesson plan for Winthrop. We always begin with an informing task. The teacher describes the initial task to be learned, and then after that, the teacher has many decisions or many moves they can make to try to develop the content further. He or she might add extensions to the task, they might refine the task, or they might make the task an application or assessment task. Extensions again add complexity and difficulty. Refinement adds the qualitative aspect of the task, trying to refine the movements by the use of cues. And then the application and or assessment part is either a competitive type of task, making it a self-testing task. In other words, looking at a performance focus. An example of a developmental analysis chart is on page 100 in your textbook. Box 5.5 is about the golf swing and a developmental analysis of a golf swing, a closed skill in a differing environment. The way that physical education teachers develop the content the most is through extension tasks. You either reduce the complexity or difficulty of the content for the learners, or you also can order the parts that will be added to create a sequence or a chain of movements, or different parts of the movement put together all together in a rhythm. The reason we use the word chain or chaining is that that's something linked to something that's behind it and also linked to something ahead of it. So there's a chain or a sequence of things that occur when learning skills. Many factors in the lesson can be manipulated to change the complexity and difficulty of the motor performance or make it easier for those that are having difficulty. One is to practice the parts and break them down into separate parts. One is the modification of equipment. Another is to change the spatial arrangements for practice or making it bigger space or smaller space. Focus the intent of the performance or the goal of the performance. The number of people involved, make them larger or smaller. Conditions of practice could be the way that the skill is being practiced, changing the rules or modifying the rules to make it easier or more difficult. Combining skills together is an excellent way of extending the content. And then, of course, establishing sequences of responses in a progression. All of these common methods of extending are discussed in the next few slides. The first type of extension, which actually makes it easier for the students, is to break a skill down into parts. Students should see the whole skill performed in a demonstration, hopefully by the teacher, sometimes from the students are demonstrating. Then break it down into the parts and then look at the whole once again so they can have a comparison to the parts. Usually smaller parts that are easy to remember are practiced in a sequence, but sometimes that's not possible and you have to isolate the parts. Many times we do that in something called backward chaining, when we begin with the last part of the skill in the sequence and then we add the beginning parts as they get better. An example would be the bowling. In bowling you would eliminate the approach, just have them stand on the foul line and practice the arm swing and the release, and then add the approach, either a 3-step, a 4-step, or a 5-step approach as they get the release and follow through much better. Another example is the tennis serve, where you would try to get them to practice the toss first and also get the contact from the back scratch position, then add the downswing and the weight transfer. Sometimes skills are learned more easily when we change the equipment in some way, sometimes with reduced size or weight. Sometimes larger sizes of balls are easier for students to handle. The rule is, if the equipment encourages less than mature and efficient patterns, then changing the equipment should be seriously considered. An excellent example of this is in volleyball when you're trying to have students practice the forearm pass. Much bigger ball is easier for them to get to, it's easier for them to see, and it is a lighter ball usually. It's important to note here that we're trying to get movements to be efficient, not necessarily correct, but efficient. We want them to accomplish a particular purpose. Some other examples of modifying the equipment are to lower the nets. In volleyball, you would lower the nets. Sometimes you'd lower the nets in basketball or the baskets. Make smaller balls, let them use smaller balls. Again, sometimes it's better to have bigger balls. Larger targets in archery, and so on, to encourage success, because the more successful a student is, the more likely they're going to continue to be physically. Spatial arrangements are an excellent way to extend something up or down, make it easier or more difficult. Sometimes we increase and or decrease the distance between partners or between groups of people to make it more difficult or easier. When we add other people to a task, sometimes that makes a task more difficult, or reducing or increasing the space area is sometimes easier or more difficult for students. Consider the game requirements of volleyball. A volleyball forearm pass to a center front, who would be designated as the setter, from a serve or a toss over the net. We're practicing the distance and the direction. So it's important for them to practice how far they have to send the ball in a volleyball game, because in a volleyball game they don't want the ball to go over the net to the other team. We want to keep it on our side and get it to our setter. For throwing, catching, and striking, increasing or decreasing the distance does make it more difficult or more easy. In throwing, sometimes the distance is better to be farther, especially if you're doing a mature pattern for an overhand throw. And of course, open skills involving moving with others, like dribbling a basketball, would be good to add a defender to it to make it more game-like. Sometimes changing the intent or the goal of the practice helps students practice better and also makes it more difficult or easier. For instance, hitting a softball only to another person really doesn't give them much of a goal. It gives them a chance to practice repetitively, but it doesn't give them a target or a goal to work for. So telling them to place or hit the ball to specific areas is more of a goal orientation. Same thing for hitting the volleyball over the net. Instead of practicing just getting the ball over the net, it's better to practice using three contacts before sending it over the net, because that makes the students actually use a setter and try to use some type of attack. When we're teaching beginners, skills are usually practiced by individuals, and then you add partners so that the individuals have to adapt to others. Some examples are practicing tennis strokes with a ball machine and then from another person's serve, or a dance step learned without a partner and then actually learning it with a partner. Adding those people actually makes it more difficult. However, adding people also develops relationship skills. Gradually adding people to increase the difficulty of a skill performance is an excellent way to extend a task. Adding people on a game task like 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 makes the skills much more game-like. That's the end of podcast 2 for chapter 5.